Alice Gould arrives at a psychiatric clinic accompanied by an elderly man. Her companion thanks her for her bravery, and she proceeds to the entrance. The doctor checks her documents. Everything is in order, including her husband's consent for hospitalization. A separate letter addressed to the clinic's director is also delivered, but since he is unavailable, Dr. Rui Perez opens the envelope. It is a referral from her attending physician, who warns that the patient is adept at justifying any of her actions. Even lies are twisted in such a way that her interlocutor cannot discern the truth, and her intelligence is so high that she can easily deceive anyone, even a psychiatrist. The doctor interviews the woman. Alice insists that she was legally kidnapped by her husband so that he could seize her wealth. However, the doctor has information that she had attempted to poison the man 3 times, leading to her hospitalization. But if she is a poisoner, why didn't her husband report her to the police? Well, in that case, he wouldn't be able to use her money. It turns out the woman might be telling the truth. Nevertheless, he is forced to diagnose paranoia and asks Deputy Director Castell to escort Alice to her room. On the way, she gives her a tour of the facility. The new clinic director has allowed patients to walk in the park and opened workshops, which has positively affected their well-being. Alice hands over her personal belongings, including a lighter, but asks to keep just one book. Castell reads the title, Paranoia and Its Signs, and allows it. The woman is examined thoroughly from head to toe, issued the institution's uniform, and advised to choose a simpler name. Upon entering her room, Alice instantly transforms, pulling out hidden notes and newspaper clippings from the book. It turns out she infiltrated the facility to find out how her client's son, Dr. Raimundo, who was a patient at this clinic, died. The scene shifts to a night when a fire broke out at the clinic, and all the patients were released from their rooms. It was then that the body of one of the twin brothers, who were held at the facility, was found. In the present, Alice wakes up in her room and heads to the morning procedures. Later, in the dining hall, she meets her new neighbors. One of them, Ignacio, seems perfectly normal and is even allowed to drink wine and have his own lighter. At that moment, one of the patients, a short man obsessed with everything, crawls under Alice's table and scares her. Ignacio chases the troublemaker away, but the little man's guardian, a man with the appearance of an elephant, stands up for him. The pair go out into the park, and Ignacio introduces Alice to the twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, who are always accompanied by a girl Romulus considers his sister just because he wants to. The action returns to the night of the incident. Police arrive at the sanatorium and find the murder weapon, a large piece of glass. In the present, Alice examines a letter she received from her client, in which an unknown killer accuses the boy's father of everything. The woman goes to talk to the patients and witnesses a clash between Romulus and the Elephant Man, who is eventually taken away by orderlies. Meanwhile, Alice is taken to Dr. Cesar for testing. She easily passes and even flirts with the doctor. The plot again shifts to the night of the murder. The orderlies discover a broken window in a door, but to reach it, someone would have had to cross almost the entire hospital. This means the killer must have started the fire to divert attention. The strategy is very calculated, something unlikely for an insane person. Once more, it is morning in the present. Dr. Cesar invites Alice for a cup of coffee and continues asking questions. The woman distracts him by commenting on his appearance, causing him to accidentally pour hot water into her cup. He is forced to give her the keys to the doctor's restroom, where Alice goes and causes a blockage. She runs into the corridor, and while the archivist calls for cleaners, Alice finds the records from the necessary year. It turns out that on the day the letter was sent to the father of the murdered boy, only Ignacio was in the city. The scene shifts to the night of the murder. Bloodstains are found on Ignacio's hands, just as the coroner's vehicle arrives at the gates. Ignacio is questioned. He is the only one with a lighter, meaning he could have started the fire, but the man denies the crime. He was simply the first to find the body and tried to help. At that moment, the investigator is interrupted. The coroner is not the usual one who comes, but the man is irritated. He doesn't care who it is, as long as they do their job. Back to the present. Alice questions Ignacio about the day he was in the city. Did he send the letter? But the man suddenly becomes anxious and runs toward the building. Alice holds him back until a heavy downpour starts, and then Ignacio falls to the ground and has convulsions. It turns out he has hydrophobia. Again, the night of the murder. The investigator is convinced of Ignacio's guilt, but to reach the broken window, he would have had to cross a water-filled corridor, and he couldn't have done that under any circumstances due to his phobia. At that moment, the doctors realize that one patient is missing from the wards. In the present, Alice confesses to Ignacio that she infiltrated the clinic with the director's permission, who was a close friend of the deceased boy's father. The man doesn't believe her, but tells her that the boy often fought with the dwarf. And, by the way, on the night of the boy's death, the dwarf couldn't be found because he was hiding in the garden. Later, Alice sees the dwarf behaving indecently and follows him. The plot returns to the night of the fire. The facility's director shares his thoughts with the detective. If humans are created in the image of God, like a perfect text, then the patients here are crooked lines that God made when learning to write. He asks not to publicize the crime, as the killer is still in the clinic. Just then, the director is informed that the missing patient has been found. In the present, Alice searches the woods for the dwarf, but encounters Romulus. He is sure he knows who she is and leads her home. The woman sees a woven house in the thicket and is amazed by the creation. Romulus confesses she is their mother, and this house is for her. Alice is touched and hugs the boy, but then she hears a rustle and runs after someone. The next moment, she is hit on the head, and the last thing she sees is the obsessed dwarf attacking her. Later, Alice finds herself tied to a bed, and César declares that she killed the dwarf. At that moment, the clinic's director enters, having returned from vacation earlier than expected. Alice is delighted. Finally, they can discuss her investigation. She tells him her conclusions, but the doctor doesn't understand her. He has no idea what she's talking about. The woman tries to remind him. They corresponded through the deceased boy's father, and the director himself told her how to get into the clinic, but he denies everything. Alice is outraged and intends to demand explanations from her client. She tries to leave, but she is restrained, given an injection, and sent to solitary confinement. 3 days later, Dr. Castell visits her. She found the clippings and notes in Alice's room. Alice tells her version of events and asks for a medical counsel. During the counsel, Alice explains that she infiltrated the clinic on purpose. The director is aware of everything that's happening because his friend was the one who brought her here. She recalls meeting the deceased boy's father at a New Year's ball. She had seen his photo in the newspaper when she was watching a story about his son's death. The man then asked for her help with the investigation and showed her a letter with accusations. Based on the signs, the letter was written by someone with schizophrenia. The clinic was not far from the town where it was sent. The rest could only be found out from within the clinic. He called the clinic's director, who allowed Alice to infiltrate the sanatorium and even gave her tips on how to simulate paranoia. Then she convinced her attending physician to sign a letter she had written and obtained her husband's consent by slipping the form among other bills. She told him she was going on a work trip and the deceased boy's father brought her here. She accuses the clinic's director of incompetence since it was because of him that the unhealthy dwarf was given freedom of movement, so she is not to blame for his death. The doctor snaps, which provokes disapproval from his colleagues. Alice reminds them that sooner or later the truth will come out. And when it does, there will be many questions for him. Later, the doctors discuss the situation and opinions differ. The woman's arguments seem quite weighty. They need to contact her husband and her personal physician, but the director suggests remembering the husband's poisoning. The first time was at the polo club when Alice unexpectedly came to lunch. A month later, the episode repeated itself after a dinner organized by Alice. When her husband fell ill, she was dancing in the living room and didn't hear his calls for help. Suspicion arose, and he recalled seeing Alice add something to the food. He then found a vial in the cabinet and added a few drops to her drink. When the symptoms reappeared, he gave the vial to the doctor for testing. That's when she made up the story to get here. Her diagnosis, a fabricated identity. Nevertheless, Castell and César insist on an investigation. Otherwise, they will go to the police. Later, Ignacio confesses that he saw the dwarf die. The dwarf fell and hit his head because he was frightened by Ignacio, who caught him trying to assault the unconscious Alice. At this moment, Alice notices a man who has been in the room since the conversation began. The director introduces him. This is Dr. Raimundo, the deceased boy's father, whom she supposedly represents. The woman denies it. This is not the man who hired her. She demands they find her husband. But the man is unreachable, and the family doctor is at a conference in Zurich. Alice is subjected to electroshock therapy and locked in a cage. While unconscious, the woman relives recent events as if they were happening again. But now, she notices the barely perceptible signs her husband made to the supposed Dr. Raimundo and the unnatural behavior of the men. She realizes it was all a setup, and she was at the center of the scam. She awakens to voices. Dr. César has allowed Ignacio and Romulus to visit her, and they have come to support their friend. She tells the doctor about her suspicions. Her husband planned everything for her money. Her personal doctor is gone, and no one can confirm her story. The woman suggests checking her bank accounts, but to do that, they need to go to the bank. Another council meeting needs to be called. Meanwhile, the director discovers that Alice has been transferred back to her room, and César goes to the police to file a missing person report. Castell searches the director's office and finds a receipt for a large sum of money from Alice's husband. The director catches her, and the girl demands an explanation. The man admits to receiving the money, but all of it went to the clinic's accounts as a donation. He announces Castell's dismissal and asks her to leave the facility. He then mobilizes the staff to search for Alice. Meanwhile, Dr. Cesar is refused the filing of a case, as all the documents are in order. At the clinic, no one can find the woman because the patients help her hide. She thanks them all and asks for help getting out. She already has a plan and asks Ignacio for his lighter. At this time, Cesar goes to Alice's house and confirms that her husband hasn't been home for a long time and that her detective badge is hanging on the wall. She really is a detective. At the hospital, the toy workshop catches fire. Meanwhile, Ignacio, overcoming himself, turns on the water in his room and starts screaming in shock. While the orderly runs to get a doctor, the man opens all the rooms and urges the patients to leave. Panic ensues, during which Alice breaks a window and opens the laundry room door. She finds medical staff clothing and calmly walks to the clinic exit. At this moment, Ignacio discovers the murdered twin Romulus. That's when the police arrive and an investigation begins. Alice approaches the gates but stops. In front of them is the coroner's vehicle, and the woman asks to be let inside. She was called to examine the deceased Romulus. Upon hearing the name, Alice attacks the woman, swaps clothes with her, and goes to examine the body. The unconscious coroner is mistaken for Alice in the dark, and she is reported to the director, who is told that all the patients are in place. But the detective identifies the woman, and everyone rushes to the room where Alice is examining Romulus. She asks to be arrested, as the police will now have to take on her case. Besides, she knows the killer. Upon examination, she noticed multiple body injuries, which could only have been inflicted by a very strong person. In fact, Romulus had protected her from the dwarf, and the Elephant Man had witnessed it. Moreover, the elephant was secretly in love with Romulus's so-called sister, so he avenged the boy. The police examine the Elephant Man and find cuts on his hands. Alice declares that she was detained against her will. The director opposes her leaving the facility, but the detective informs him that they checked her accounts, and they are empty. Castell presents the director with a letter demanding his resignation, signed by all the clinic's doctors. An emergency board meeting is scheduled for the next day to discharge Alice Gould. Alice goes to the surviving twin, and here it turns out that it wasn't him who died, but his brother Remus. It's just that on that night, Remus was scared, and his brother left him in his room while he searched for his sister. Alice comforts the boy and promises to visit him. Later, her belongings are returned to her, and she heads to the council. The woman easily answers all the doctor's questions. The director disdainfully notes the incompetence of his foolish colleagues, who fell for her tricks, and announces his resignation. The medical commission unanimously votes for Alice's sanity. And at that moment, the man who brought Alice to the clinic enters the room, and it turns out to be Alice's personal doctor. He approaches Alice and asks, what has she gotten herself into this time? But the woman cannot answer. A very complex and interesting plot. 2.5 hours fly by in one breath. Definitely a must-watch for detective and psychological thriller fans.